Good afternoon. On behalf of the Montgomery Endowment, I am pleased to welcome retired U.S. Army General John Abizaid as our Montgomery Fellow. The Montgomery Fellowship Program, made possible through the generosity of the late Kenneth Montgomery, class of 1925, and his wife Harl, has brought distinguished fellows to the Dartmouth campus for the last 30 years. The outstanding individuals who have been chosen as Montgomery Fellows have engaged our students, faculty, and the broader community. Now, the most striking recollection that many who either served in or reported on Iraq have of General Abizaid involves seeing the four-star general happily chatting in Arabic with ordinary Iraqis in some of the most dangerous areas of Baghdad. Such scenes bring out three qualities about General Abizaid that have made him one of today's most respected commentators on America's role in a complex and ever-changing world. First, he recognizes the importance of understanding the culture and speaking the language of countries in which one is involved. While his education includes all that one might expect for an officer who rose through the ranks to become a four-star general, an undergraduate degree from the United States Military Academy at West Point, infantry officer basic and advanced courses, Armed Forces Staff College, it is also the product of a less commonly traveled path. He received a U.S. Army War College Senior Fellowship at the Hoover Institution on the Stanford University campus, where he worked on a project entitled Peacekeeping in America's Armed Forces. In his civilian studies, he earned a Master of Arts degree in Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University. It was named an Olmsted Scholar at the University of Jordan in Amman, Jordan, where he studied Arabic. While at Harvard, he wrote a 100-page study of defense policy for Saudi Arabia, a work described by his professor as absolutely the best seminar paper I ever received in my 30-plus years at Harvard. In short, he knew the area where he served. Second, he has recognized that one does not win wars, particularly wars of insurgency, by guns alone. It is necessary to understand the local population and the local culture to be able to recognize the roots of a conflict and to deal with those. In one of his speeches, he noted that military power solves about 20% of your problem in the Middle East. The rest of it needs to be diplomatic, economic, and political. Third, by his actions as well as by his words, he has won the respect of all with whom he has come into contact, be it Baghdad's shopkeepers, reporters for the Western media, those who served under him, politicians in the United States, and even those in academia, whose job it is to study wars and policy. By talking about the unusual qualities that General Abizaid brought to his position, it is important to remember that he had a military career as distinguished as any. When he retired in 2007, after 34 years in the Army, he had served longer than anyone else, some 4 years, as commander of the United States Central Command, overseeing both operations and strategies for some 27 countries, ranging from the Horn of Africa to the Middle East and South Asia, countries that include Iraq and Afghanistan. That was the culmination of a highly decorated service record that began with the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He subsequently commanded the 325th Airborne Battalion combat team in Italy, which deployed under his command to northern Iraq in 1991 to provide a safe haven for the Kurds. Following a tour as Assistant Division Commander, 1st Armored Division in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Abizaid served as Commandant of the United States Military Academy at West Point from July of 1997 to August of 1999. There, he reined in hazing rituals and revamped the curriculum. Later, he took command of the 1st Infantry Division in Germany, which provided the first U.S. ground forces into Kosovo. He was also Deputy Commander for the Combined Forces Command, U.S. Central Command during Operation Iraqi Freedom. In June of 2007, he returned to Stanford as the first Annenberg Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution, where he works for the Preventative Defense Project at Stanford and with Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and serves as director of the George Olmsted Foundation. Most importantly, in his numerous comments on the Middle East, on the limits of power and on the role of the military at a time when conventional battlefield prowess is not sufficient on its own. He has been a voice for common sense, for fresh thinking, and for calm understanding. Please join me in welcoming today's Montgomery Fellow, General John Abizaid, who will be discussing the United States and the Middle East, strategic choices for the way ahead.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. How's the sound? Are we good in the back? Because President Wright and Susan Wright invited me to come here to be part of the Montgomery Fellows Program, and they invited me for a month. And I said, well, I really can't do it. Little did I know that this 3-day stint would have all of that month's material packed into it. I have been going all over this campus, talking to too many people, and I think I better ask for your questions now. But so bear with me on that. It's great to be here. Congratulations, sir, on this great college. You notice I didn't say that other word. It is a great place. I have immensely enjoyed the opportunity to interact with faculty and with students. I'm of firm belief that this young generation that you're raising here will do us proud, and whatever problems we may have created for them, they'll solve. And I thank you for that. And I'm going to talk about the problem of all problems today. And it's, of course, a very interesting problem that we're going to have to face for a long time. Please understand, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm a former soldier of the Republic, actually a soldier forever of the Republic. Matter of fact, if you were a veteran, would you stand up? Thank you. Now, thanks. Thanks for your service, your willingness to serve. For you young guys that have served in Iraq, thanks for doing that. Very proud of the work that our young people have done, but it's not just our veterans, it's our State Department people, ambassadors around here, and others that have worked for the State Department, CIA people who I know are anxious to stand up and identify yourself, and other great members of our country that are out there doing hard things. And these are difficult things. I know we read about in the newspapers how we've all screwed this thing up so badly. We'll have to come to our own conclusions, let the history books put the chips where they're going to go, and we'll see how it all comes out. But I think there are serious things to talk about here, besides whether or not we stay in Iraq or go from Iraq, besides whether or not we stay in Afghanistan or go. As I go around the country and talk to people, and I try to do this a lot, not only at universities, but places like Gardnerville, Nevada Rotary Club. Does anybody here know where Gardnerville, Nevada is? Actually, somebody does know where Gardnerville, Nevada is. 2 people know where it is. And people say, and I'm retired in Gardnerville, Nevada. Why? I didn't want to be in Washington. Why else? Because it reminds me a lot of the Afghan-Pakistan border area. And everybody in Gardnerville, Nevada is heavily armed. And like I think in the state of New Hampshire, they do not really like the federal government. And we're building militias, and so my skills come in handy. So that's why I'm in Gardnerville, Nevada. It's a great place. But wherever I go and wherever I talk, people don't want to dumb down the message. Just talk to us. What do you think? What's going on? Doesn't matter what audience, whether it's a great audience like Dartmouth, filled with the smartest people on the planet, or a place like Gardnerville, Nevada, which is also filled with the smartest people on the planet. Everybody wants to know, and they want to be talked straight to, and there's a feeling out there, in my opinion, that maybe a little bit of straight talk would work and go a long way for all of us to understand the challenges ahead. And the challenges are difficult, they're daunting, they've cost us lives and treasure, and undoubtedly we're going to have to figure our way how to come to a good outcome. And at the central stage, of course, is our role in the Middle East. And it's a tough area. I was in command of an area, and this is the geographic boundaries of it. It goes all the way from Kazakhstan, made famous by that wonderful movie Borat, that I know all the students here have seen. It's a great country that's moving forward into the 21st century, propelled by an awful lot of oil resources. The Central Asian republics, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, down through Egypt and down through the Horn of Africa. It's a fascinating part of the world. First time I went out there was in 1977. My wife and I was a captain in the military. I went to Arabic language school at Monterey, and then we went to the University of Jordan. And I came to understand that there's a cultural problem afoot in the Middle East when my wife had a baby out there. My second daughter was born in Jordan. And I came back to the neighborhood wanting to pass out cigars, and I said, I've had a baby daughter. My wife has had a baby daughter. And my neighbor said, don't worry. You know, don't worry about it. God will smile on you sooner or later. You know, don't get overly concerned about it. You know, you will have a son at some point. And you know, it's like the movie Cool Hand Luke. What we have here is a failure to communicate. And in many ways, that's kind of the problems in the Middle East, and one of the things that I want to bring out, that, you know, what's happening out here, why is it so difficult, why is it so dangerous, what are the challenges ahead, how are we going to deal with them, and are we confident about our ability to deal with these problems in the 21st century? And these are really 21st century problems that are pretty interesting. This area used to not include these two countries here, Lebanon and Syria. And at one point, Secretary Rumsfeld called me up in 2003, right after I took command, and he said, General Abizaid, I'm looking at your area, and I see that it does not include Syria and Lebanon. And I'm thinking about including Syria and Lebanon in your area of operation. What do you think about that? So those of you who think there was no communication between us, military guys, and the Secretary of Defense are wrong. There was, okay? So I said, well, Mr. Secretary, there's a war in Afghanistan, a war in Iraq. Terrorism is endemic throughout the region. Piracy off the coast of Somalia, genocide in the Sudan, and other assorted problems, not the least of which is guarding the flow of oil to the global economy of the world. So all things being equal, I don't want them. And he said, fine, thank you, you got them. And I said, okay, Mr. Secretary, while you're at it, please give me Haiti and North Korea. He did not. Of course, it was the right decision to make. But this is a hard part of the world. And there are many, many difficult things going on out here. Terrorism is endemic. Ideological movements are afoot. The greatest transfer of wealth in the history of the world has taken place from our economies to this particular patch of land out here in the Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf, however you want to look at it. Some of the poorest societies on earth down in here struggling just to feed their people. Difficulties with state violence, nuclear proliferation issues in places like Pakistan, places like Iran, who knows where else it may be next. Very difficult part of the world, and I came to look at the various conflicts that are moving about this region as perhaps the first battle of globalization, where people in this part of the world are struggling with how to exist in a planet that seems to be globalizing on our terms. And they're not quite sure they necessarily want to be part of that, not quite sure they know how to fit in on it, and they're not quite sure that they might not want to have a different approach to globalization, perhaps one that's described by a person such as Osama bin Laden. It's a violent part of the world. It's a part of the world where 250,000 of our sons and daughters are out there day after day doing the hard work of the nation. They're doing hard work, great work. They've served in military units and organizations that are really high-performing units. They're high-performing people. We ask them to go into villages and fight the insurgents at night, and we ask them in the daytime to go ahead and build schools. It's amazing what we ask our young officers and non-commissioned officers and soldiers to do and Marines to do in these tough places. Our sailors are patrolling these waters to keep the flow of commerce going. Our airmen are patrolling these skies, dropping bombs in support of the infantry when they need it, and also providing surveillance and capabilities to try to find an enemy that's tough to find. There's no single enemy in the region. It's problems within problems within problems. It's complicated, yet some of the greatest people on earth live out here in wonderful cultures, and we've got to figure out how in the 21st century we're going to move through this period of globalization together. We've got to figure out how we're going to avoid what Professor Huntington referred to as the clash of civilizations. How are we going to make sure that doesn't happen to us? Because I think it would be a cataclysm not only for us but for everybody in the region. So, looking at some of the minor problems in the region, and by the way, this is only one of 1,000. You could literally talk about this forever. And it's not to say that the region is ungovernable. It is to say that as the Romans found out and the British found out, and as we're finding out, it is not controllable. It can be shaped. It can be shaped to a better outcome. We've all got to figure out how to work to do that. But you look at it, and there are so many different problems. It's not unusual for us to want to concentrate what's going on here. Most of our troops are fighting here. Most of the problem seems to be originating here. A lot of the political debate is dealing with that problem in Iraq, secondarily to Afghanistan, and to treat these subjects as if they are not connected. And unfortunately, I think it's clear, at least to me and to those of us that have fought out there, that there are connections. They're sometimes hard to find and hard to understand. But it's very important that we give a try not to talk about tactically what's happening in downtown Baghdad, but strategically what's happening in this part of the world, and why will this part of the world continue to remain important to the United States of America and continue to attract our attention and our resources for the foreseeable future. And while President candidate McCain may be here on an issue in Iraq, and President Obama, candidate Obama may be here, they'll find that as they start to move towards the reality of being sworn in, whichever one of them becomes sworn in, they'll find that they have operating room that's probably like this to deal with these very, very difficult problems. What has been missing in the presidential debate, in my estimation, and by the way, I have no intention of criticizing them, but what's been missing in the debate, probably because we citizens don't demand it, is a discussion about the strategic problems in the region. What's going on out here? How are we going to approach it? Today I'll talk about things that I think are going on there, every one debatable. The good thing about being a retired four-star general is you can have an opinion. I really enjoy that. The other good thing is, you know, when I give talks like this to my officers, I'd say, well, what do you think? You're right, sir. You know? So, well, what do you really think? Home run, sir. You know? But when I come to places like Dartmouth or Berkeley or Harvard or Stanford, it's much different than that. And I hope we'll have plenty of time to talk, and I intend to have a discussion, and we can challenge, debate, discuss, I hope in a respectful way, the issues that are afoot out here. Now, I'm going to go back to this map, and I'm going to tell you that I think there's 4 broad strategic issues that we need to pay attention to out here. They could be given in a lot of different orders. I'll give them in the order of importance that I think, but even that's debatable. But first and foremost is an issue that we need to pay attention to, and I would call it the rise of Sunni Islamic extremism as evidenced by people such as bin Laden and organizations such as Al-Qaeda. Many of my Muslim friends, and I have many, don't like it that I even use the term Islamic in the same sentence with extremism. I have to use it the way that the enemy describes themselves, and while they don't describe themselves as extremists, they do describe themselves in very distinct religious terms. For them, whether we like it or not, it is a religious campaign. And it's a very interesting organization that has been built in Al-Qaeda, and I would urge you, don't just think of them as being a bunch of terrorists sitting around here trying to figure out ways to kill Americans. Actually, they are. I mean, they are terrorists, and they are sitting around up here, and they are trying to figure out how to kill Americans, but they have bigger plans than that. And they have big plans that have been laid out in very clear detail that you can see in the very many scholarly works that they have produced and debated and discussed. They're on the internet in great proliferation. It's clear what they stand for. They want to drive American power from this region, from the Islamic world. They want to then push American forces and American power out of the region because they believe it will then expose the corrupt governments that are not accountable to their people, that are not cognizant of the right path for Islam, and they will push those governments out of the picture, gain a foothold of territory, expand throughout the Islamic world because their way of Islam is the right way of Islam. By the way, most Islamic scholars don't agree with that at all. And then at some point in the distant future, Islam of their version will cover the globe. I know it's strange to hear an American military officer talk in those terms, but I'm only telling you what they say. I've read it, I've heard it, I've talked to them. I've had the opportunity to talk to people that have been part of this. And you know, it's a movement and an ideology that is at the beginning stage of its cycle. If fascism was like it, it started about in a period where it became dangerous in the 1920s. Adolf Hitler wrote a very interesting book in that period called Mein Kampf, where he clearly laid out what he thought, what he meant, what he'd do. And lo and behold, here comes World War II, and he did what he thought, what he said, and what he meant. And it's you know, pretty interesting. You can also go back to the early period of Bolshevism in the 1900s and see this gestation of a movement to leadership. And it shows itself in the way where you have a leadership of an elite that tries to bring the masses on board. That's what Lenin and his team did. That's what Hitler and his team did. And that's what bin Laden and his team is trying to do. Now, the good news is, and there is a lot of good news, the good news is the vast majority of people in the region don't want bin Laden's brand of Islam to become ascendant. They don't want the extremists to win. And so it should not surprise us that part of the problem associated with what was going on here in El Anbar province in Iraq was the terrible conduct and depredations of Al-Qaeda that turned the tribes against them, that caused the tribes to want to work with us as opposed to fight us. And it has made Al-Qaeda almost a spent force in Iraq. I'd call them down but not out. But we also have Al-Qaeda activity in Saudi Arabia, Al-Qaeda activity in Egypt, Al-Qaeda activity in almost every one of these countries on the map. And it's become especially painful and has resonated recently in Afghanistan and Pakistan in a way that I think can only be described as a deteriorating situation. So we've made progress in some areas. In other areas, we haven't. But this movement of Sunni Islamic Islam is something that I think Sunni Islamic extremism exemplified by Al-Qaeda needs to be something that we pay attention to. Now this map is too military, I understand. It's got too many numbers that aren't labeled, etc. But it's a way that I used to try to talk to my officers about the strategic challenges in the region. And number one through the numbers, say what problems we've got to think about. First and foremost, I would tell them we've got to stabilize Iraq. Then we've got to deal with this growing problem, and this is back in 2007 when we're having this discussion. Then we've got to deal with this growing problem here in the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan, Bajur, Waziristan, etc. Got to deal with that problem because it's getting out of control. And oh, by the way, that's probably where the Al-Qaeda senior leadership exists. Have to stabilize Iraq or Afghanistan. We have to deal with the Arab-Israeli problem. We have to deal with piracy off the coasts of Somalia. And we have to understand that as we push Al-Qaeda here and here, they seem to be moving down here. In other words, these types of terrorist movements are such that they seek anywhere that they can operate, and because they're not tied to a nation state, they have flexibility that is actually unprecedented in modern times. Then we have to confront Iranian power, Syrian power, and over here you see poor old number 6, which is genocide in Darfur. So, of course, you don't have enough resources to deal with all of these things simultaneously. You try to husband your resources and do what you need to do to deal with them, and you also ask the rest of the government to provide the other great parts of national power: diplomatic, economic, informational, intelligence, educational, informational, I think I said, to get these types of power into the fight so that we're not just wrestling out here with military problems, but we're wrestling with a whole of government solution that not only is whole of government, but whole of international community. Not because we can't solve it alone, but because you need to have partnership with the people in the region to help them help themselves against the extremist threats. And so the key becomes, how do you help them help themselves in a way that is respectful to them, gives them more capacity, and moves towards a better future, and over time starts to squeeze out Al-Qaeda. Now, I've spent a lot of time on Al-Qaeda. Believe me, the next 3 issues I won't spend nearly as much time on. But this is the one I think we need to talk about. This is a geographical representation of how Al-Qaeda as an organization may have looked. And I urge you to understand that this is geographic. They have these kind of support nodes. Notice some of them are in Iran, by the way. They've got support nodes in various locations. They've got operational cells here, there, everywhere. They've also got operational cells here in Western Europe, over here in Southeast Asia, here in the United States. I mean, this is a global organization with global reach. Figured out how to attack us here, the Brits, the Indonesians, and nearly every country that's on this map, waging a pretty tough battle here in Algeria that's gone off and on with Salafist extremists there. And they're not connected in ways that are clear, but they are connected, and we know that cells and support nodes, et cetera, are focused in a pretty interesting way. And if you then try to think as a military commander in what we West Point guys would say Clausewitzian terms, you then ask yourself, where is the enemy's vulnerability? Where is the strategic point of focus that we have to deal with here? And when you say, again, to use Clausewitzian terms, how do we capture the enemy's capital or destroy the enemy's army, and you understand the nature of these terrorist cells and how they operate and where you operate, you understand that classical military approach to the problem is only part of the problem. The other part of the problem is dealing with other things. Now, think of this when I go to the next slide, which is how I think is a better way to envision the Al-Qaeda organization in its broadest sense. It's networked. It is global. It is capable, yet it's not attached to any nation state. It's tied to its ideological belief. It has areas down here, technical expertise, weapon suppliers, human capital, fighters and leaders, training camps. These yellow things are things that military forces can get at, not always effectively, but if we know where they are, we can go after them. Can't always go after them everywhere because you've got diplomatic issues that might prevent you from being able to move with freedom of action. Over here, you got sympathetic members of governments, front companies, safe havens. And remember, the enemy is looking for safe havens from which to operate, and they're not afraid to move from safe haven to safe haven. Only look at where bin Laden has been in his career: Afghanistan, Sudan, from Sudan back to Afghanistan, then to Pakistan and other places. These things up here are very interesting in blue, but over in here there's facilitators, smugglers, financial people, sympathetic non-governmental organizations that want to help them in their cause. And here is where I think Al-Qaeda has fused their 7th century ideology with the 21st century, and that is in their ability to exploit what I call the virtual space. Now, in Napoleonic times, there were 2 realms of warfare. Those realms were essentially land and sea. Go up to World War I, it becomes land, sea, and air. Somewhere in the Cold War, it becomes land, sea, air, and space. And I think in modern times now, it's land, sea, air, space, and virtual. A lot of people don't like me to say that, but this enemy has figured out how to recruit, how to train, how to educate, how to proselytize, how to assemble pretty good media and propaganda campaigns that cause people to join their team to conduct operations in a decentralized fashion. They are networked and loosely centralized. They are a very effective organization in being able to do what they want to do. Again, they're not mainstream, but we should not let this organization, in my estimation, become mainstream. So dealing with the problem associated with bin Laden and his people is fundamental to the campaign that has to be waged in this part of the world. And by the way, almost every one of these Islamic countries or Muslim countries are fighting against bin Laden and his people. Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, you know, they have various luck and various abilities to do well at times. We're fighting with them in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's clear that this decentralized network of people that have a common idea and ideology is something that we need to be concerned about and think about. Okay, issue number two. Issue number two is also ideological. It's also extreme. It's also tied to religion. And it is the ideological mullah government of Iran and their desire to expand their hegemony in this particular region of the world for obvious reasons. They are very ideological. They've been that way ever since the overthrow of the Shah in 1979. They are, unlike Al-Qaeda, attached to a nation state, Iran, and they are probably closer to the end of their cycle than to the beginning of it. Some of their force is spent. People in Iran don't necessarily like the ideological restrictions of the government, yet there are certainly very aggressive ways that this regime leads their people that creates a dynamic where Iran is a force to be reckoned with in the region. The question, of course, is what do you do about Iran? And Iranian power is not just within Iran, it's within the Shia community in Iraq, the Shia community in Afghanistan, eastern Saudi Arabia where Shia communities live, and we certainly know what happened in the Shia communities of southern Lebanon where Hezbollah and Israel had a pretty interesting war, where the Israelis, interestingly enough, had a hard time dealing with, theoretically, a group of terrorists. But in reality, a group of well-armed, well-organized, well-directed people that have a vision for what they want to do and how they want to do it. So the rise of Iranian power in the region, coupled with the rise of Sunni extremist power in the region, create two ideological dynamics that are dangerous for the people in the region and actually are not ways that the people in the region want to succumb to, or not ideologies that they want to succumb to. Item number three, in my estimation, is the continued lack of clarity in the Israeli-Palestinian theater. People that have no hope want to gravitate towards extremism. The lack of clarity in the safety of the state of Israel and the future of Palestinians has created a dynamic for many wars in this region, and left unresolved will create the dynamic for many more wars. And it also breeds people who want to join the team of these various extremist movements for reasons not necessarily associated with religious ideology, but out of hopelessness. This problem really is one that we always attack on the last year of any administration. And we are vigorously attacking it now in the 8th year of President Bush's administration, and we vigorously attacked it in the 8th year of President Clinton's administration, and I would hope that the new President of the United States would say, let's attack it in our first year. And maybe we won't solve it, but if we can move it forward in a more logical manner. Let's move it forward. Fourth issue. Have any of you ever been to Bridgeport, California? Bridgeport, California is near Gardnerville. You're probably an ex-Marine, aren't you? Are you? Yeah, Marines are there, and fortunately my wife didn't marry one. Might have been better for her, I don't know. I'll have to ask her. Bridgeport, California has the highest gas prices in the country. You know, it's about $5 a gallon now. And it's because all of the service stations in town, all three of them belong to one owner, and they're all at least 100 miles away from civilization. And so they have a perfect market. But the issue, of course, is not Bridgeport, California, and it's not their gas. It's the issue of oil, imported in particular from this part of the world, but our reliance on Middle Eastern oil. When I was a brand new second lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division as a paratroop officer, I would spend an awful lot of time in gas lines trying to get gas in my car every other day. And North Carolina authorities would look at my license plate, which was from New York at the time, and they determined that I was always on the wrong day. And so, you know, I still haven't figured that out, but I suspect it has something to do with New York license plates. But the truth of the matter is, we knew then that we were susceptible to interruptions of this precious commodity of energy that flowed from this part of the world, manipulated by people who rule out here. And we knew then that there was good reason to gain some geopolitical space from the curse of imported oil, and we chose not to do anything because the market saved us. And perhaps the market may be saving us again, but it actually doesn't save us because it limits our options about what we can do out here because we feel a need to intervene around here frequently. I fought half my career in this part of the world. I fought an awful lot out here. My son-in-law, God bless him, is 1 year in Afghanistan, 4 years in Iraq. He's captain in the Army, commands in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, Mr. President, as you well know. And he is a pretty committed soldier, graduate of West Point, had the temerity to date my daughter when I was commandant, you know? And I do hold that against him. But he's a good soldier, wounded once pretty severely. He's back on his feet, getting ready to go back. My son-in-law has fought this war longer than my father fought World War II. My dad left in February of 1942 to the Pacific, went and fought the Japanese as a chief motor machinist mate in the United States Navy, and he came back on or around VJ Day, back in August of 1945. But my son-in-law's been in combat longer than my dad, and my son-in-law's come back a couple times. My dad never came back, but my son-in-law, he's come back several times. We're asking him to fight hard. Now, he's got 2 grandkids, and I'm determined that those 2 grandkids don't need to be fighting in the Middle East. You know, we need to figure out how to make it easier for ourselves, and reducing our reliance on one commodity from this region will do much to give us geopolitical maneuver space, not unlike that which we have in Latin America or Africa or other places in the world that aren't so essential to our lives, our prosperity, and the prosperity of course, good people in this part of the world. So those 4 issues, Shia extremism, Sunni extremism, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and our dependence on Middle Eastern oil are strategic issues that will keep the next President of the United States fully employed in some fashion for a long time. Now, how are we going to deal with it? Well, first and foremost, in my opinion, we have to continue the fight against Al-Qaeda. We have no choice. We may walk away from them. They will not walk away from us. If you think otherwise, you should go and talk to some of them. Nothing personal, but they're not going to let us go. It wasn't an act of some sort of a reaction to something that we've done that they happened to come over here and attack us on 9/11. They attacked us on 9/11 because they have a plan and we're part of it. And part of their plan, by the way, is to cause us to have that war of civilizations out here. And one of the things we got to do is figure out how, with the great people in this region, how we ally ourselves with them to fight together against this extremism and not fall into the trap that bin Laden thinks he may have set for us. So we got to continue to go after them. And in the question and answer question period, I'm sure somebody will say, well, what's the problem? Why haven't we got them yet? And I look forward to that. It always comes. And I don't have a good answer. But I would tell you, we got to do that. Iran. A lot of people say the Iranian president says we're going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And when they get a nuclear weapon, they'll be able to do it. And they're a country that praises suicide bombing and has done all sorts of terrible things around the world, not the least of which is to fuel violence among anti-American groups in southern Iraq. And once these guys get the bomb, we can't trust them. If they get the bomb, we better go attack them. That's kind of the line of argument. I don't buy that argument. I believe the nation state of Iran is deterrable. I understand it's debatable. But I think that the great power and might of the United States shouldn't worry about the weak power and might of Iran. We can deal with it if we have to. We can send them a clear, unambiguous signal that if you do this, you might as well figure that we're going to do the same thing we would have done against the Soviet Union if they attacked any of our European allies. We can deter them. Would the Israelis bet on that? I don't think so. But I'm telling you, I think that there are ways forward to contain Iranian power and Microsoft. I love it when this happens. I think there's ways to contain Iranian power and to provide deterrent effect against them. And again, in the question and answer period, I think we can talk about it. I know you'll want to talk about it. And the Arab-Israeli conflict, let's push it forward. Let's attack diplomatically. Let's move as hard as we can with the Israelis, with the Palestinians, with their Arab neighbors. I mean, who would have thought that the Jordanian army and the Israeli army would talk together? They do every day. Who would have thought that the Egyptian army and the Israeli army would talk together? They do. I mean, the world is different than it was back in 1947. And there are opportunities. And by the way, not only are the Israelis threatened by Iran, but so are the Arab states. And there could possibly be a way to move forward to build a little bit of common interest in the region. But we've got to move that process forward diplomatically. And finally, I've said it enough. I didn't say drill. I didn't say build nuclear plants. I just said let's figure it out. I don't have the answers. I'm not smart enough. I'm not an engineer. But I know that there are technologies that we can invest in that will create jobs, that will help work against this environmental problem that's clearly afoot in the world, and that will give us more geopolitical maneuver space. And I think we need to quit pretending like we don't have a problem with imported oil and attack it the same way we attacked going to the moon back in President Kennedy's administration. So I have solved the problems of the Middle East. And we are at the point that everybody really wants to be at, which is that I quit talking and we start talking. So let me say in closing, because I don't know that I'll necessarily get to this, a message to the Dartmouth students. You're the future leaders of the United States of America, whether you like it or not. You come to this great university and you gain from this great university knowledge that is precious in the extreme. And you will have to decide, are you going to be part of the problem-solving issues or part of the critical class? Are you going to sit around and wring your hands and say how stupid everybody is? Or are you going to roll up your sleeves and be part of the solution? We've given you a tough hand, but we can't fix it without you. We need you to be part of the solution. Think about serving in the armed forces, God forbid. Think about serving in the State Department. Think about serving in the CIA. Think about serving in CARE and going over here helping people that need your help. Think about working on religious schools that counter the effect of madrasas here in this particular part of the world. Think about going to the hospital in downtown Manchester and working in the hospital there to help your communities. We all have to help out to make our country great, keep our country great, but the circumstances surrounding this part of the world, the rise of Russia, the rise of China, the rise of other states that will compete, not necessarily dangerously, will require your attention, your initiative, your devotion, and we need you. So join the team. Thanks. Okay. Thank you. All right. Based on the schedule that Susan Wright has given me, we have 3 hours for questions. Sir, I'll let you. There's a question over here.
Microphone is coming down. We're going to use a microphone so people in the room.
General Abizaid,
Yes, ma'am.
about a year ago, I saw a BBC program which had, which had two members of the British Special Forces on who were at Tora Bora. They said that when they had bin Laden in their sights and could grab him, but CENTCOM told them to stand down. Could you explain that to me? That could have saved us years of misery.
The most important thing I'll say is I was not in command. I was safe and sound in Washington. Just wondering why they didn't get that guy. Look, let me tell you, first of all, I've heard many rumors about how often it was that we were this far from getting them. We don't get them until we get them. And we weren't close to getting them then. I don't care what they say. I was the director of the Joint Staff at the time. I looked at the intelligence. I saw what General Franks was doing to conduct the campaign. Every campaign has its pluses and minuses. We didn't have very many troops in the region. We can talk about what we did with what we had, and we did a pretty good job with what we had. But clearly, bin Laden and his people escaped across the border, and they got themselves established right here. Now, I would also say, ma'am, first of all, it's a great question, and it's a fair question. But I would also say to you, as much as I want to get bin Laden, I was stationed in the Pentagon in 9/11. I was in the Ukraine at the time, but by the time I got home, we were still pulling the bodies of my friends out of the Pentagon. So I have a real desire, plus I've seen what they've done throughout this region, which is horrific. And we need to get him, and we need to get his number two guy, who's actually, in many ways, more important to get, because he's the intellectual hub of the machine, and that's Ayman Zawahiri, the Egyptian doctor. We need to get both of them, and we should spare no effort to do it. They're in this area somewhere, undoubtedly, but that's a heck of an area. That's all the way from somewhere up in Oregon to down to the California-Arizona border. Think of that as the Sierra Nevadas or the Rockies, and they're up in there. They've got the protection of local tribes, and they got a lot of money flowing from people that support them in this part of the world that goes over there that they use to buy influence and protection. So, but I tell you, if you get bin Laden and Zawahiri, you don't destroy the nature of the movement. The movement will live. The movement's going to require an awful lot of international and national attention along that circle I showed you to pressure it. At some point or other, we'll find them. But the movement won't go away when we get them, and we should not kid ourselves that will happen. The other thing I'd say to you is, you look very fit to me, and I'd say don't be the number 3 person in Al-Qaeda, okay, because you'll only last about 6 months. That's about how long they last. Number 3 person's usually the operational person, and they have to show themselves to do their job, and we hit them pretty hard. And we've gone through an awful lot of number 3 people. But this is a decentralized organization, by the way. It's not one that if you defeat it here, won't appear here or there or somewhere else. And people that attacked the London trains, subway system, they weren't operating on direct orders, waiting for the telex to tell them what to do up there. They had a view of what they were supposed to do. based on an ideology that they had accepted that caused them to operate in a very decentralized fashion. That's why this enemy and this movement and this ideology are so dangerous. So over time we'll do it. I'm always interested when I hear somebody say, well, look, let's just go in here. Let's take these guys out. And, we got enough trouble here and here. We need to work with the Pakistanis before we work against them. And we do need to be impatient with the Pakistanis about controlling this area, but we also need to understand that Pakistan is a nuclear-armed country with 160 million or so souls in it, second largest Muslim nation on earth, and its nuclear weapons in a state of anarchy here could go into the hands of the bad guys. And if that happens, I'm afraid, I wish I didn't have to worry about it, but I think we all have to worry about it. If nuclear weapons get transferred either on purpose or on accident to Al-Qaeda cells, I believe they'll use it in some fashion somewhere to make their case. Remember, what they're trying to do is upset the world order, and so it's a pretty dangerous situation. But we need Pakistan's help, and we're going to have to figure out how to help them help themselves more. As a matter of fact, throughout this region, we need to quit being the primary military force provider and over time do less and less as we increase capacity more and more in places like Iraq. I was in Iraq about a month ago, and the security situation's much improved. Governance situation, not so much improved. But Iraq is better. But is it finished? Is it over? Have we turned the corner? No, we haven't. And it's getting worse here. So there's work ahead. It would be impossible for me, by the way, to ignore this financial crisis we're in. Can we afford to do what we're doing out here? Well, I can only answer that by saying, can we afford to not do it? And what the question is, like President Clinton might have said, what's it? It is, how do we organize ourselves to deal with this? And I'm not being disrespectful. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next question. I took too long. And again, I'll let the microphone people move to the sound of the guns and get the microphone. And so whoever stands up with a microphone, rather than me choosing from the audience, I think it's better that the microphone people do it. That way I can't be blamed, and I'm happy to. Are you a student here?
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for the great lecture. This question is about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So one thing really stood out about what you said. You said that a lot of the Palestinians join terrorist movements in the rest of the Middle East just because they have such depraved conditions back at home. So
Because of why? You said because of why?
Oh, because of the depraved conditions they have back at home, like in Palestine, because of hopelessness. That's I think verbatim what you said. But so my understanding of the Palestinian Israeli conflict is that the reason why a lot of these people turn into terrorists because they have really oppressive conditions. But the reason why they have oppressive conditions right now is because the Israeli blockade in Palestine and a lot of other historical things that either Israel has done or the governments that themselves have done. So it just seems like the situation in Israel, Palestine, is really circular because you have people turning into terrorists, and the reason why Israel further implements things like blockades and oppresses them is because these people are terrorists. But these blockades turn the people into terrorists.
Okay.
So specifically, how do you
Question.
plan on? Yeah, specifically, how do you plan on breaking this kind of circular trend?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and just in the way that you explain it creates an image of how difficult the problem is. It's a tough problem. And if it wasn't a tough problem, we would have solved it by now, or the Israelis would have solved it. By the way, I lived in Israel. I was an observer in the United Nations in Lebanon. So I was in Observer Group Lebanon, running around up here, reporting on the Hezbollah guerrillas as they fired rockets into Israel. And guess where my family was? Israel. They were living up on the northern border at Nahariya, and it used to be funny. And I was sitting there. I'd see my wife in the evening. I'd say, Did you get rocketed today? She said, yeah, but they just hit the banana plantations. But it illustrates a point, which is this is an area of constant conflict. And we've got to break the cycle of violence. I don't really know exactly how you break the cycle of violence, but one way you don't break it is by sitting on the sidelines and ignoring it. You have to understand that Israelis and Palestinians want peace. They're tired of this insanity, and we can't let the problem continue to persist in a way that is bad for the region and bad for the interests of our own country. Another Arab-Israeli war, if this thing continues to go unsettled, another Arab-Israeli war is not out of the question. And all of a sudden it becomes more dangerous, though, in the 21st century because of the issues associated with weapons of mass destruction. And look, I understand what the problem is on weapons of mass destruction. We said we'd find them in Iraq. We designed our campaign to look for them in Iraq. Our soldiers fought the battle, and Marines fought the battle, equipped with chemical gear because we thought they'd use chemical weapons against us, but we didn't find it. And so then we somehow or other think, well, people misled us on purpose, they lied to us, weapons of mass destruction aren't the issue, but we have weapons of mass destruction in Pakistan that in the event of a government meltdown could go loose. We've got weapons of mass destruction being contemplated to be built by the Iranians. And in some future of Iran, I suspect that the good people of Iran will want to get rid of their crazy government. And when they do that, there will be instability, and a weapon possessed by them could go loose. Or, even worse, it could be transferred. And if they get weapons, then they want to get weapons. If they want to get weapons, then they might want to get weapons. I mean, proliferation of nuclear weapons in the 21st century should be all of our worst nightmare. We got to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. Again, I'm not lamenting the problem. I'm just kind of facing the problem, saying, okay, what are we going to do about it? And one thing to do is let the pressure out of this that causes people to want to seek these types of weapons. And I think there are ways that we can and should protect the independence and the sovereignty of Israel. It's a state, it's a people that deserve protection. They don't want to be protected by us, for good reason. I understand what happened in Israel and what happened to the Jews in Europe in the Second World War. But on the other hand, all of us have got to move forward in a way that also recognizes that the Palestinian issue is one that continues to erode confidence of people in the region and move people towards extremes. I understand it's an emotional issue, but we need to use the good offices of the United States and the rest of the world to move this to a better future. I think we can do it. I think the Israelis think that they need our help. I think the Palestinians think they need our help. I think we should do it. Controversial issue. Who's got the microphone? Yes, sir.
Given that the U.S. represents an important locus of power, and given that you change uniforms, I'd like to ask you the question whether you think the size of the military in the United States is the right size, and if you don't, what size do you think it should be?
Well, for what we've asked the military to do, it's not big enough. Is the Army strained? I gave you the example of my son-in-law. So our people are strained. Our equipment is strained. The bill to fix the Army equipment, every year in Iraq is like 5 or 6 years worth of operational tempo on our equipment in peacetime. So we're wearing out our equipment, we're wearing out our troops. They've done a wonderful job. They'll continue to do a wonderful job. And you should remember that we designed our armed forces that for a long war, we would mobilize. We'd mobilize the Reserve and National Guard fully, not partially. We decided not to do that. And in a big, long war, we not only would mobilize, but we would then activate the draft cards of everybody that continues to sign up for selective service, and we'd bring them onto the team in order to protect the nation. We have elected not to do that. So we have taken a very tiny portion of the United States of America, like this great young man here that fought in Iraq, and we've not only said, go get the job done, but do it forever. Or not forever, of course not forever, but as long as you can. And it puts strain on him, on his family, on equipment, etc. So The Army now is going to increase its size in the current plan, as is the Marine Corps. But we have this problem associated with the financial crisis that we're in, where we got to ask ourselves, what's affordable? And so we have a couple of options in this. One is reduce our forces over here. We've already started to reduce them in Iraq. Will it continue? I don't know. We'll see what the next president wants to do, what his mandate is. But it seems to me that the situation in Iraq is actually ahead of the political debate. It's slowly but surely stabilizing, and it remains fragile. I was just there. I'm cautiously optimistic that it can stabilize, but it's very, very fragile. Those forces can come down. Forces here, unfortunately, need to go up. They need to go up because there's a deterioration of the security conditions along the Afghan-Pakistan border area. Do we have those forces? Well, I don't know. I mean, what are we willing to do? I think what we need to do is transfer more and more responsibility to indigenous forces throughout the region, provide them with our indirect measures of support and power, intelligence, reconnaissance, et cetera, U.S. Air Force, Navy, and do less ourselves and ask them to do more. After all, it's their part of the world. But we have to do it in cooperation with one another. I believe we've got to get a lower footprint, but I also believe that Iraq and Afghanistan must stabilize. Otherwise, these four big issues that I talked about tend to move in a very bad direction for all of us. So the Army needs to be bigger, the Marine Corps needs to be bigger, or we have, say the terrible word, need to reinstitute national service of some sort. Yeah, I agree. It won't happen. He said won't happen. I agree, it won't happen. If it was going to happen, it would have happened, but it didn't. And it won't until we feel that this problem is bad enough that our national survival is at stake. And we're not there yet. Okay? And so, at some point or another, we have got to ask ourselves whether or not we do want to have a form of national service where we encourage people to be part of the team I talked about in my closing comments. Thanks. Next.
Hello, I'm from China. So I would like to ask you to share your opinions, ideas about the role of China may play in the future in this Middle East area, especially today that China has huge interests that cannot never be ignored anymore. So I would like to hear your voice about this. Thanks.
About China power?
About the role of China will play in this area.
Well, China's playing a role in this area. Chinese companies are, especially down here in this area, working very feverishly to secure oil contracts, exclusive oil contracts in that part of the world, because they're concerned that in a period of crisis, they would not have access to energy and they would have to be in competition with the rest of the global market. And so there's a competitive nature to Chinese economic action down in this part of the world, but there's certainly no what I would call Chinese military action that's in this part of the world, although there are some Chinese forces that I think have been dispatched in some way to the Darfur area in Sudan. Now, I would also say that China has an interest in what goes on with Sunni Islamic extremism, and if you'll recall during the Olympics, there were attacks in the Xinjiang province, the Uyghurs, some of whom believe in the ideological views of bin Laden and have decided that they're going to be part of that resistance. And I think there were 4 or 5 major attacks that were publicized, and I imagine there's probably 4 or 5 attacks that aren't publicized. And so China has an interest not only in connecting this part of the world, and one of the things that you immediately see when you look at the map, it'd be nice to be able to connect through Afghanistan, but China has not only an interest in connecting in this part of the world, but also not letting Islamic Sunni extremism get out of control in its own population. Now, I don't believe that we are doomed to compete with China militarily like we did with the Soviet Union. I don't believe that. I don't think there's anything in China's power that shows, in China's history, that shows them to be a power of expansion and domination. I think they'll be an economic competitor. I think there's ways to cooperate with them. And I think we're going to have to figure out what the exercise of Russian power here in Georgia means to the future as well. I think it's clear, though, that while we may have started off the 21st century with America supreme and unchallenged militarily, economically, politically, that this portion of the 21st century coming up will be an era of multipolarity that we're going to have to get used to. It's probably not a bad thing. And I also think that the next president of the United States, both of whom had said they would do this, will do everything they can to restore American confidence with our friends, allies, and partners abroad, and even those that aren't our friends, allies, and partners. One more question.
General Abizaid, is there enough of a program, both in the military and in our government, to teach people to speak Arabic, Urdu, and other necessary languages?
How many of you in this audience are taking Arabic? Good. Well, it's not enough. Yeah, thank you for that great question. And look, I'll tell you that at the height of the Cold War, we literally had hundreds of thousands, if not actually millions, of people who understood the Soviet Union, who could tell you the underwear size of the leading people in the Politburo, who understood the Soviet society, communism, the ideological tracks of Marx, Lenin, et cetera, They understood all that, and there was a huge industry within the United States to provide those experts, and they very much helped us get through that period of confrontation with the Soviet Union, and they were in great demand, and they did great service. Some of them, by the way, are starting to show up again on television, you know? And we'll just have to see what that is. But by comparison, when I took command in July of '03 out here, I asked for an inventory of officers that spoke Arabic, knew the culture, spoke Urdu, Pashto, et cetera, that we could bring onto my team and my headquarters. And really the number was in the low hundreds, actually below 300. That's a problem. We've got to adjust ourselves to build people that understand this area so that we can deal with the immense challenge. And of course, places like Dartmouth University will do that. Well, look, as will the United States Military Academy. One more question?
Considering that Israel failed in disarming Hezbollah, do you think it's possible for the Lebanese or the United States to succeed in that endeavor?
I don't think it's possible for the Lebanese army to defeat Hezbollah alone. Hezbollah is more powerful than the Lebanese army. Hezbollah's got more people, they've got more heavy equipment, they've got more sophisticated machinery, and they've got a sectarian leadership that's more committed to their military action than the Lebanese government is to supporting the Lebanese army. Ultimately, you have to have Lebanon restore its sovereignty within its own borders. Otherwise, it just creates continued chaos in the region. I don't think it's likely that the Lebanese will be able to do that anytime soon, but I also don't think that we've expended enough effort to give the Lebanese the tools necessary to be successful themselves. So, and we should do that. Now, I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, that in my comments, I have brought to you an awful lot of problems, but I am not pessimistic about our ability to deal with them. I'm not pessimistic because I know the quality of the young people that are out there fighting. I know the quality of our great State Department people, CIA people, people all over the country that are concerned about this, that are willing to dig in and help solve the problem. And I'm optimistic that Iraq over time will stabilize, that Afghanistan can be stabilized, and I'm optimistic that we can fight this ideology that is unfortunately at move in the region with the right application of national power. And I'm confident that both of our presidential candidates will attack it in a way that makes sense for the country. But we as citizens need to ask the questions a lot about how we're going to deal with these problems. There's no problem that the United States can't deal with. I believe in the value of American values. I believe that our values are values that we should cherish and that we shouldn't force on others, but we should give them the opportunity to experience on their own. How they decide to go will be up to them, but I do believe that certain things are true, that people want to live in freedom, they want to have a chance for prosperity, and they want to have a chance for their kids to lead a better life. How can we help do that in the 21st century? I'm not sure I know, but I am sure that we must. Thanks very much. Thanks.